Hi, Achim here from InnerSpace Explorers. Today we're going to talk about tanks, specifically about second-hand tanks. And basically the question from a viewer was, and the question came quite a few times, I bought or will buy second-hand tanks and I want to know how to check if these are good for diving or if they're okay. And obviously the simplest question to that is go to a dive center, have them checked, hydro tested, whatever the regulations in your country are, but we want to talk more about the do-it-yourself thing. So the topic obviously annoys my dog. So before we got deeper into the topic, today I'm lucky I have a cameraman and I quickly want to introduce him. So say hi to Marco. Marco is originally a patron of mine. And then he became a student, and then he became a friend, and now he's an IC instructor. So,
and I'm still a student.
Yeah, well, that
probably
will
forever.
That will never end. But I just love this because it shows that this online community thing works, and people can meet, and yeah, friendships can come up from this. And today, Marco is with me and helping with the camera work. So before we really get into the topic, there's kind of a disclaimer. A so-called good friend of mine recently said, I'm a diving idiot and I have no clue about anything, as it is with good friends, and therefore be very careful with what I'm saying, because maybe it's wrong, maybe it's gonna kill you, and maybe it's completely incorrect for the country you live in. So, that being said, in Germany the regulation is that these tanks need to be hydro tested basically every 2 years. The rule also says if you're private and you do not fill these commercially, you do not have to hydro test them at all. And I do not test my hydro tanks anymore for a very long time because I don't believe in this. And actually, from quite a few conversations with manufacturers, people working in the manufacturing of these tanks, they all told me, don't do this. It's the worst case scenario for a tank. On one hand, you say don't overfill a tank. I mean, especially talking about the aluminium tanks, do not overfill these tanks. On the other hand, every second year you fill them with water and you put 300 bars instead of 200 bars in them, so 4,500 psi instead of 3,000 psi. Plus you have the water in there. And quite a few accidents that I'm aware of happened right after tanks have been hydroed. So you can think about this whatever you want. This is my very personal opinion and that's the way I handle it. Maybe this is completely illegal in the country you live in, so make sure you follow your local rules, guidelines, laws, and don't take this for granted for your country. Very important. So this is a do-it-yourself video that fits my country, my laws, and my diving. And as this so-called good friend says, I have no clue about anything, so maybe this is just for entertainment. Alright, back to the topic. I have a specific case right now, and this is why I took this video in right now. As you see, there's two very vintage tanks at the moment that I recently got. And there will be a video coming up where I talk about vintage dive gear, and so back in the day, before the buoyancy compensator, before the horse collar and all these things, so when weighting was a real issue where you really have to be weighted correctly because you cannot compensate for being overweighted at depth. So Marco and myself will make a really cool video about this, show you in the water and explain exactly how that was done back then, because basically that should still apply today, but as we have these crutches called buoyancy compensators, a lot of people don't care about this and go in the water overweight. I mean, I did a couple of videos about being properly weighted, but this is a great example and we will dive these tanks. So obviously we need to check if these tanks are okay. Those are from the 70s, late 70s, early 80s. The guy who gave them to me told me that he used them 2 times, and since that they are standing somewhere. So obviously we want to check these tanks, replace O-rings, etc., etc. So today we want to talk about the tanks. In another video I'll talk about servicing the valves and what you have to look for when you open these valves. So the first thing you need to do when you have one of these tanks and you want to inspect them, you have to open them. And there the drama starts already, because a lot of people that I see don't have the right tools and they use a hammer. And that's always wrong. Don't do this. So I know there will be plenty of people out there that say, I always do this and this always works. Might be, but generally speaking, don't do it. So there's a high risk of damaging the valve, and that's something where you should use a professional tool, something like this. So most probably it's not worth you buying one. So maybe you can borrow one from a friend or in a dive shop, but don't go out and buy one of these if you don't do this on a very regular basis. So to open that, you screw it in the valve. It's the same thread as the regulator. You screw it in all the way, and then normally you can open it with a proper punch with your hand or with your palm. Otherwise you need a hammer, but with the hammer you push this one and not the valve. So if you come across tanks that still have these conical valves like this this one that I made for my dive center back in the day, everywhere in Germany where these have been used, they've been replaced by modern tanks. So these normally are not in use anymore. And I personally also do not use any tanks anymore that have a conical valve. Because the idea that to seal something against the pressure, that doesn't make any sense at all. So anyway, this one was cut open because I wanted to show you what a steel tank looks like compared to an aluminium tank, and I'll talk about this in a second. But the first thing you need to do is you need to make sure that these tanks obviously do not have any gas in them anymore, which sounds very logical. And yeah, you open the valve till nothing comes, but if you have one of the old ones, it might have a reserve, as you have here. So these tanks down there, they have a reserve, and we'll have a look at this in a minute. So if you're not familiar with the concept, these are spring-loaded, and if this is in an upward position, there's normally a steel rod or a cord. And back in the day, before the SPG was part of the regular dive equipment, you've been breathing down your tank to a point where breathing became hard, because the spring here was basically blocking the remaining 30 bars or so. And then you just reached back and you pulled this down and you took this spring basically out of the way and it released the remaining 30 bars, and those you used to go back to the surface. It does not really work great with the IC dive planning, but that was the way it was done back then. And what can happen is that this thing is open or it's broken, so you open the valve, there's no air coming out anymore, and you open it and there's still 30 bars in it. So make sure this is down, move it a couple of times and make sure there's really no gas in it anymore. All right. So then when you open that, you want to inspect the tank visually. So obviously if there's a lot of rust outside or there's cracks, holes, whatever, I mean, we don't need to talk about that. But you want to look inside of the tank. And this is where you can actually help yourself. You don't have to buy any fancy tool. So I just made something up for like 10 euros that everybody can copy. That's just a piece of steel wire, and I put one of these LED bands on top of it. Very simple, very cheap, and you switch that on and in white, full brightness, and then you can get it inside of the tank and you can inspect your tank. So we'll do that later on with these tanks, but just to give you an idea, and you can look down there and see how the inside of the tank looks. And obviously what you don't want to see is a lot of rust. So if Marco can have a look at this tank, this one actually doesn't look too bad. It is like a rusty surface, but it's not, there's not a certain spot where it's like, oh, there's a lot of rust there. So it's very even surface, and yeah, it's a little bit rusty, but that's not an issue. And the reason why you want to check that, and the reason why you should keep tanks when you store them in a standing position, is because these tanks are thicker on the bottoms than on the side. And when you look at that steel tank, it has about 2.5, 3 millimeters of wall thickness. And this is stored in a laying position, and you have moisture in it. That moisture will collect along one side, and this will actually weaken the tank in a line. And if it gets overpressure, if it gets weak, it will blow open like a bomb. And if this thing has 200 bars, you don't want to be anywhere near that. And if it's standing and the moisture is on the bottom, you will have rust on the bottom, but the bottom is a lot thicker and a lot more sturdy, so it's much less likely that that tank has a corrosion issue that makes it explode. I mean, in the end, same thing, but it's way safer than the other way around. So on the other hand, if you look at an aluminum tank, so that was an industrial tank, as you can see on the neck, but it doesn't matter, scuba tank looks exactly the same. You see the wall thickness is way more, so this is about a centimeter, about 10 millimeters in direct comparison. But obviously it's the weaker material, but generally these aluminum tanks are pretty sturdy. And same thing here, you don't want a lot of corrosion in like one line, and here you can actually see the difference to the bottom. The bottom is a really sturdy piece, and same goes here on the shoulders. So you just wanted to make sure you see one of these from the inside, so you get a better idea of what a tank looks like. So take these to the side and take one of these. So there's also a regulator on it. We need some service before Marco and myself gonna try it. Maybe we do a video like a comparison, so I service mine and Marco's I don't service, and I will see the difference. He looks very happy about this. So generally you find quite a bit of information on these tanks. So this says Pressluft TG, which means compressed air Tauchgerät, so dive tank. It has 200 bars, that's the fill pressure. It is from Barracuda. It was stamped on January 1983 with a TÜV. That does not necessarily mean it was manufactured there, but then it had another one in 88 maybe. There's one from 86. So that has been serviced, yeah, last time in 88. And there's more. It's a the 275, if I remember correct, says something about the material. It was made for Great Britain, as far as I realize that. Luxfer is the original manufacturer, so Barracuda is the company that sold it. It's a 10-liter volume. 300 is the test pressure in bars. It has 12.47 kilograms. That's interesting when you want to weight it. So in our next video, that will be an interesting part, and that's some sort of a serial number. So there's quite a bit of information on that tank, especially when it was serviced last time and had a hydro last time. So this is a fixed backplate, so we leave it on there. It doesn't matter for what we do. Here is this reserve thing, and as you can see, this has no function here anymore, so that's most probably broken, and we open it and it's completely open. So this tank is definitely empty, right? So there's no risk in opening this, and if so, this will be a very interesting video in a couple of seconds. So I screw this thing in here all the way, so because we want all the threads in there, and then we open it. No hissing sound or anything, because if there would be a little bit of pressure in it, like these 30 bars that I've been talking before, I would have not been able to open it like that. I guarantee you it would have taken a lot of force, and then immediately there would be a really, really loud hissing sound, and that's actually when you stop and go somewhere else. So be really careful with this. And now I can unscrew this valve, and this stupid line there. And So looking at the valve now, this is actually the first good indicator. So I have a couple of other valves here. So this is, for example, one that I took out of a tank recently. And when you look at these threads and these threads, then you can see this is super clean. This is like brand new. While this, discoloration, there's some dirt and stuff in the grooves of the thread here. I have another one here that has corrosion on the top, so that's also not in good shape. Nothing that can't be fixed. But this one tells us that this should be a super clean tank, and probably the guy who gave it to me and said this has only been used 2 times was not lying to me and was correct. Also, when you see there's this little sticker here that if this would have been used heavily, probably would be gone. So the other thing we see here is the O-ring, which is not an O-ring really anymore. It's more some piece of rubber that's most probably not sealing very well anymore. And it also shows us the way that was sealing. So you see this angled area here. This is where the O-ring actually sits. And there is also different valves, because I don't have a proper sample now, but sometimes on these tanks, especially on steel tanks, you have it where there's more like a groove in there, like a step. And then you need to make sure that you have the right O-ring for that. There's different types of O-rings with different thickness. And so you need to make sure you get a valve that fits the sealing surface of your tank. If you want to replace it, so in case, ask your dive center, ask a professional what is the right valve to go there. And a very important part is, especially to the technical divers out there, sometimes you use tanks from the US. So I have a lot of 80 cubic foot stages that I bought in the US and imported myself, because they have, in my opinion, better trim in the water, and they have a very similar but different thread. So in Germany, the thread here is an M25x2 thread, a metrical thread, and in America it's a 3/4 x 14 NPSM. That's what the thread's called. And the scary thing is that you can take one of these American valves and screw it in here. It doesn't really fit great, but it goes in and you can get it all the way in. The problem is, after 50 or 60 bars, this thing will fly out, and if it gets you, it can kill you. And the same goes the other way around. So you can take a German M25x2 valve and put it in an American tank, and the same thing occurs. It will fly out and it will hurt or kill somebody. So be really careful, and if you think you're not 100% sure, if you don't have a clue, ask a professional. Don't play around with this stuff. 200 bars in a tank like this is like a bomb. So really make sure it's the right tank and the right valves that fit together. So here's an example, for example. So this is 25x2. That's a German valve that fits into that German tank. And just wondering if there is...
It's supposed to still be there as well.
Yeah, but it is not. But anyway, I mean, it's a German tank by everything you see here, and the thread goes in very smoothly. I can turn this around like this with my finger. If it's a non-fitting valve, it's not. I really need force to get it in. So if you have the feeling that the thread of the valve does not really fit and you cannot easily spin it in, then something's wrong. Stop it and seek for professional advice. Okay, that being said, we'll have a look inside that tank. So we switch on our super duper light here and get it in, and Marco will make sure that actually that looks not so bad, and this looks absolutely fantastic. That tank is in excellent shape. There's no corrosion whatsoever. There's a little bit of stuff in there, more like dirt or something, probably because the tank was standing in the basement for years and years and years, and the valve was open, and that tank is in like new state. So I have no issues putting a new O-ring on that then freshly serviced valve, put it on my compressor and fill it, and that's exactly what we're going to do. And in the next video I'll show you how I take this one apart and all the components and what you need to watch out for, and then we'll reinstall it and put it in the compressor. So, if you like this, please hit the like button, subscribe to my channel, and click on the little notification bell so you get informed when I upload new content, which is normally once a week. Other than that, stay safe, have a great weekend, and I'll see you next week.